right, well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Amphitheater Hot Shop here at the Corning Museum of Glass. My name's Eric Goldschmidt, and I run the Flameworking programs here at the museum. And we have prepared a special demonstration for you that is sort of based around some objects I made for our feature exhibition this year, which is called In Sparkling Company, and it focuses on the relationship between glass and the costs of social life in 1700s England. And so I made some dessert items to be featured in some of the different serving dishes that are featured in the exhibition. And desserts and sugar are a key component of the narrative in the show there. So I'm going to show you how I made some of the objects that are in some of those serving dishes. And working here at the museum, as glassmakers, we're often presented with different challenges. We get requests to make all sorts of different objects, and anytime you get out of sort of your standard line of things you make, it's an added challenge. It's a lot of problem solving and trying to figure out how to make things look just right. The biggest challenge for me with making these foods was to make glass actually not look so glassy and look like the actual food. So texture and surface were very important elements. So I'm going to dive in and show you how I created some of the different textures for some of the different foods. We're going to start off with what's known as an aniseed biscuit, which I have an example right here in my hand. And then we're going to get into a little bit of citrus. I'll show you how I make texture on the surface of an orange. Also show how we made some of the candied elements, adding a little sort of sugar texture to some different fruits. And we'll finish up by making some Syllabub, which is an 18th century dessert item. So I am joined by Linnea Seidling, who is our curatorial assistant, was a key voice in putting this show together. So I'm going to dive in. I'll start working on the aniseed biscuit, and Linnea is going to dive in and start telling us about some of the sugar themes, I believe. So I'll let you dive in there. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Hi, everybody. My name is Linnea, and I am the assistant curator here at the museum. And I assisted our curator of early European glass to put together this exhibition. So, In Sparkling Company, Glass and Social Life in Britain during the 1700s. So, I think it might make sense for me first to talk about, what is Eric working on? Some of the examples of what he made that are in the exhibition. So, Brad, if you could pull up the first slide, we'll show everybody what we're talking about. So, our visitors here at the museum today, you may have seen this in your visit today. So, this is a recreation of an 18th century dessert table at a formal dinner event. And so we recreated this in our exhibition upstairs. And so all of the clear glass that you see are all objects in the museum's collection from the 18th century. But to sort of make the effect, make it seem a bit more real to everybody, our curator thought, maybe we should put some food in some of these vessels, bring them alive a bit. And so he had the really fun idea to activate our flameworking team here at the museum to make glass foods to put into the vessels. And so that is what Eric is showing us today, as he mentioned. So this is kind of the basis of what we're going to be talking about. So in the 1700s, sugar was becoming much more readily available for the elite in England. So why did that happen? So in this century, it was colonialism basically made this a lot more easily available for them. So in British colonies in the Caribbean, mainly on Jamaica, there were sugarcane plantations that were being, operated by enslaved people that the British slave ships, kidnapped and trafficked across the ocean to work on these plantations and create the sugar that the British wanted to consume. So that's a really big theme in the exhibition, is showing these beautiful, luxurious, sparkly, lovely objects, but also making sure that we talk about, the wealth that made all that luxury possible. And similarly, talk about what made all of this sugar possible, what brought all this sugar to England. So on the dessert table, So when our curator was planning this exhibition, naturally he went first to the museum's permanent collection. He saw what we already have. And it was not a coincidence that most of our holdings of English 18th century glass had to do with dessert. It was tablewares that held dessert. And this is not a coincidence. We didn't have a curator that was just like in the past that was really into this stuff. This actually makes sense because dessert was a very prominent course in dining in this century because it was the most luxurious course. So dessert as we know it kind of came about in the 1600s, meaning, it's the last course you eat, it's sweet. But in the 1700s, it became a much more prominent part of dining for the elite in Britain. So we recreated this dessert table to kind of give you the effect of what one would usually look like. So it usually had all different types of things, sort of separated into two groups, sort of like wet desserts, like wet sweetmeats and dry sweetmeats. And they would be things like, ice cream, jellies, which are kind of like Jell-O, custards and creams, stewed fruits, candied fruits, and then your dry sweetmeats would be, cookies and cakes and candied fruits and candied flower petals and lots of delicious things. So the piece that Eric is making right now we found this actually from a recipe from the 18th century. So this came from a cookbook by a woman named Hannah Glass, and the title of the book is The Complete Confectioner, or The Whole Art of Confectionery Made Plain and Easy, which the title will become very funny in a moment when I read the recipe for this biscuit that Eric is making for us. So like he mentioned, this is an aniseed biscuit. So aniseed or anise, that's usually what I call it. So here's the recipe for this biscuit that was published in 1747. So to every 12 pounds of dough, put 20 ounces of butter, a pound of sugar, 2 ounces of aniseeds, with a little rose water, and what spice you think fit, and bake it in a moderate oven. That's it. So you kind of fill it in from there. I know that I certainly, as a baker, I certainly have a lot of questions reading that recipe. There's not flour mentioned, there isn't eggs mentioned, even though those two ingredients are mentioned in every other biscuit recipe she has in her book. It's a little confusing, but that's not terribly surprising. So recipe books in the 18th century, particularly this one, has actually been documented, Hannah Glass's book, as having a lot of copied recipes, a lot of recipes that were published in other books, both in English and in other languages, from even decades earlier. So the likelihood that she actually tested all of these recipes or really looked into them is pretty slim, so it's not super surprising that it's a bit vague and confusing. But yeah, that's kind of what I have for now.
So getting some texture on this, I started with just some clear glass rods. These are 12.7 millimeter borosilicate rods. And to add different textures, I've got all sorts of different tools up here. I've got this little plate that has some really fine spikes on it, and just some different metal rods with different diameters to them. So using the different diameters gets me different sort of air bubble effects. And the aniseed biscuit, the images I was able to find of these, they look sort of like a biscotti. So we've got all the sort of the texture of a biscotti. So I add some larger air bubbles with a big brass rod. I've got a little steel rod here, another finer piece of brass. So just sort of pushing some texture into the glass. Now, I'm just shaping this out of clear glass, and ultimately we did want the colors to look as accurate as possible for these different foods. Now, there are colored glasses that would have allowed me to make something pretty similar to what the biscuit should look like. But to make the coloring as accurate as possible, we found the best option was to actually paint the glass. And most glass objects you're going to see out there in the world, if they're colored, they are not typically painted, but painting is an option. So I add all this texture just by sort of pressing in with my different textured tools. And from there, we sandblast the glass. So once it's sandblasted, the whole surface is rough, and then it can really hold a layer of paint pretty well. So, I don't know if, Brad, we can switch to our detail there. So just the clear with a bunch of the texture. When we sandblast it, the whole thing has that frosted look to it. And then from there, we have a very talented flame worker who does demonstrations with us, Caitlin Hyde. Her skills go way beyond just flame working. Mine tend to just be focused on what I can do with glass at the torch. She's a skilled painter as well. So she was able to take the sandblasted and textured glass pieces, add layers of paint to make them as accurate as possible. So that was our solution for getting the biscuits to look as accurate as we could. Now, other items that we added in, also some different candied fruits, as Linnea had mentioned, and even some fresh fruits we added in for part of the exhibition. So I've prepared an orange. I'm going to pull it out of the oven. I've been keeping it warm in this oven here so I can work as quickly and efficiently as possible. Now, I know this looks really dark right now. It's because it's really hot. Orange glass, when it's really hot, tends to look extremely dark, but this, as it cools, will come out as a nice bright orange. So, believe it or not, to get a good texture like a citrus fruit, I use a Brillo pad. So I can just heat the surface, get it nice and hot, and I want to just sort of dab it quickly with the Brillo pad, and it adds this brilliant texture just like the texture of citrus. So, I don't know if we can see that texture there, Brad. Keep that moving a little bit. So we start to see some of that texture. I'll keep adding on here a little bit. So I made some candied orange slices to go into the exhibition, and also made some candied lemon peels. And I've got the stock of what I made those candied lemon peels from, which is right here. And this has very well-defined texture on this also. So to make the lemon peels and also to make the candied orange slices, I use a process known as marini, which is essentially layering different colored glasses in sort of a cylindrical length such that we can cut the cross sections, and the cross sections show you the image of what you're after. So in the case of the candied lemon peels, I just wanted the peel. I didn't need the whole core of the lemon. So I just took a clear glass tube, like the tubes I've got over here, and I striped my colored glass over the tube, heated it all in, added the texture with the Brillo pad, let that glass cool, took it to a saw, sliced up individual segments from the saw, and had those lemon peel slices. So I also have one of the candied orange slices in my oven. I'm going to bring that out in just a moment, but we'll show you the different elements that is built from. So I start by making the pulp, sort of those individual cells within the orange. So you can see maybe some of the cells, if you can really zoom in on that, Brad. There we go. Yeah, you can see how it's got those sort of individual cells. Now, I made a whole bunch of these. I stacked them all together, which builds up a much bigger, more detailed cell. I'm putting a little bit of water on here so that rough surface is a little glossier, so you can really see what's going on in here. So we see those cells all sort of stacked together. I can then take those cells and press them into a wedge shape. So we've got the different sort of wedges of the interior of the orange. I take multiple wedges, I stack them together to make a circle. I've got my orange slices. So let me go ahead and pull the slice that I've got out of the oven. We'll show you how the sugaring works. And for that, I've got some crushed glass powder. This is what we call frit, if I can open it. There we go. just very fine, clear glass powder that already looks like sugar. So I just want to fuse some of that to the surface of these orange slices. So I'll go get that out of the oven. And Linnea, I think, has a little something to tell us about citrus.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. That is unbelievable. I think it sounds fantastic. I'm really excited to get to see you watch you make one in person. So the first question that I had for Eric, or had for myself to share with you all tonight when he said he was going to be working on citrus fruits this evening was, how do they have citrus fruits in England, in a colder climate in the 1700s? So I really wanted to answer that question and share it with you tonight. And the answer to that question was hothouses. So oranges are native to India and China, and were successfully grown in Spain and in Italy before they came to England in the 1600s. But in the 1700s, they became a bit more common with elite Brits to grow in their own fancy gardens. And so how did they do that? So originally, they would plant the trees in the ground, as one does, but then during the colder months, they would cover the trees up in an attempt to keep them from freezing. But then they moved on to building entire structures to hold these trees. So instead of planting them in the ground, they would plant them in pots, in tubs, in portable portable planters. And so they would be outside in the summertime, and then they would bring them inside in the wintertime. So I actually have a couple pictures of a still standing one of these buildings, and they're known as orangeries, as would make sense. They hold oranges. So Brad, if you could bring that slide up, that would be great. I'll have to tick through a few to get to it. So here is an orangery at a country house, at a country manor, more like, in England outside of the city of Birmingham called Hanbury Hall. And this orangery was built in the time of our exhibition, right in the middle of the 1700s. And so what makes it an orangery? How does it help these fruits grow even during the winter months? It's all about the south-facing window. I know I certainly know that my home heats up a lot faster when I have my south-facing windows not covered up in the hot summer. So these buildings were sort of the precursors to modern greenhouses that we're familiar with. So it was the south-facing windows that helped bring in the sun to trap the heat. And then sometimes they were actually assisted a bit with some artificial heat, so some coal-burning stoves, some steam-powered things, and for growing, we don't have any pineapples in this exhibition, but for growing pineapples, an early process was actually using some fermentation to build some heat. Like I know when you have a composting pile, it can get hot and steam. Apologies, Brad, a second slide that I have up shows what an orangery looks like in the wintertime. So this picture must have been taken in the summertime because all of these exotic plants are outside in the front of the building on sort of a gravel area in their pots. But here, this next picture must have been taken in the winter. So here they are, all moved inside. And some of the plants that we have in here that I had to identify are, there's some lemon trees, orange trees, there's also oleander, an olive tree in there, and then also some agave plants that you can probably see the best here. But yeah, so you had to employ expert gardeners to be able to do this for you, and you had to be able to afford to build something like an orangery. So having a simple orange, having a candied orange peel on your dessert table was incredibly luxurious. The dessert table really was all about luxury. It was all about fancy and fun and deliciousness. The dessert table was meant to be both delicious to the tongue, but also delicious to the eyes. These desserts were made, they were colorful, they had beautiful textures, just like Eric is working so hard to recreate all these beautiful textures. And, glass really fit in well with that. It really helped highlight all the beautiful colors and shapes, all these cakes in like cute little sizes. And so glass helped show all of those colorful desserts, of course, because it's using colorless glass. But then also when you incorporate, glass cutting And when you have lead glass, it's all sparkly and lovely, and so that really helps with the beauty. And one of the things I forgot to show you when I was talking about dessert tables originally is that in addition to the beautiful vessels, the beautiful desserts, often you added in other kinds of decoration. So Brad, if you could bring the slides up one more time. I'll go back to a beautiful dessert decoration that we have in the museum's collection. So this here is actually made for, and was made for display on a dessert table. So all these little components will be kind of separated apart, and all of the vessels with your lovely desserts would be kind of interspersed around it. So sculptures that were made out of sugar paste, out of marzipan, almond paste, or porcelain, or even there's evidence that people had sand paintings done directly on the table, so they would only last for one night. How fancy is that? And even more appropriately, this beautiful decoration that was made in Venice on the island of Murano in about probably 1760 by Giuseppe Lorenzo Briati is actually flame worked, the technique that we're watching Eric work tonight.
All right. So I've got this orange slice pretty well candied up here with a whole bunch of 2 different sizes of frit, so it sort of represents a couple different grains or textures of sugars on there. Of course, bending it a little bit gives it more of that sort of dried, candied look. It's not going to be a perfect uniform slice after it's been dried. And we've also got the different textures going on the surfaces here. Hopefully we can see that. So I'm just going to finish off the last area where I've got this rod attached here. I've attached it at a cool enough temperature. I should be able to get that rod off with just a little tap here. There we go. And I'll just add a little bit of the clear glass to fill that last spot where that rod was attached. And I really need to just sort of control the temperature here. I don't want to overheat the frit, the crushed colored glass. I want it to maintain some texture. If I overheat it, it just smooths right in and we lose the texture. So it's just sort of a delicate balance of temperature to maintain the texture. If I underheat it, then that stuff just falls off. So it's sort of a delicate balance there. But I think we're in good shape. So I'm going to go ahead. I want to put this back in the oven, make sure it'll cool down safely without cracking. And then we're going to dive into one other sweet treat that I certainly had never heard of before we started researching for this show. And the more I read about it, the more surprised I was that it was such a sort of a prized item. And I'm awfully curious to make some of this ourselves and see how it actually tastes. It's called Syllabub. And the images I was able to see, you see some images in paintings of Syllabub. I did find some images on the web of Syllabub that people had made more recently. And it almost looks a bit like ice cream, like a scoop of ice cream in a glass. And this right here is a Syllabub cup. This is designed specifically to hold this dessert item. And I've got a little more work to do. I've prepared a bunch of the colored glass here. So I've got a clear glass tube, and I've been laying stripes of this sort of medium yellow colored glass over the surface of this. I'm going to continue to fill in the last couple of gaps. Then I'll really fuse in that colored glass, and I can start to shape this into something that's going to look a bit like a scoop of ice cream. So the ingredients are pretty interesting for this stuff. Linnea, you wanna dive in on some of the ingredients and the ins and outs of Syllabub?
Yes, I too, Eric, was surprised that this was a very popular dessert at the time because I think it sounds kind of gross. Brad, if you could bring up the slides again, I have an image of what we're talking about just to help you guys get an idea. Ooh, I think I go back here. Nope, I'm wrong. All right, so here's a painting that is in the collection of the Yale Center for British Art, and it depicts a merry group enjoying dessert. And they have a pretty modest dessert table, not nearly as elaborate as the one that we've made in our exhibition. But here on the table, I have a detail shot, is a plate with Syllabub. So what it is a salver, which is kind of like, looks like a cake plate, with these little individual cups, just like the one that Eric showed us, filled with Syllabub. And also in the center is another, like a sweetmeat glass with a cover that would have held a different dessert. So what is Syllabub? So Syllabub is a dessert that's made out of, it's made in a few different ways, but predominantly the ingredients are kind of the same. So there's always some kind of alcohol. So usually it's wine or claret or sherry, sometimes cider, sugar, some sort of dairy, so like milk or cream, and then sometimes there's lemon juice, lemon zest, or egg whites added in. So simple Syllabubs were just, you took all those things and you mixed it together. And then of course, if you're familiar with cooking and baking, adding acid and dairy is usually not something you want to do. So letting that sit overnight, it would curdle. So, Syllabub is usually called a layered dessert, a layered drink, because overnight it separates. So you get this kind of curdled cream stuff on top, and then it's more of a more liquid dessert on the bottom. And so that was sort of the first iteration of Syllabub. But the second one is sort of, I think, is probably what's depicted in the painting, and then also what Eric is making for us tonight, has a much more robust, fluffy top. So you would use the same ingredients, but instead of just letting it sit and do its thing, you would your cook would whisk it very vigorously and make this really fluffy foam. And then if you wanted it to be even fluffier, you would sort of skim off the foam, and then you would let it sit in a sieve and sort of drip any excess liquid out, and then you would do it again, and then you would repeat that until you have this extremely light, pretty dry foam. And so then you would fill your Syllabub glass with a little bit of sweetened wine, so you would add sugar to your wine, and then spoon this on top. And then another iteration of Syllabub had egg whites added to the mixture, so you'd imagine that would kick up an even fluffier fluff. So that's what Eric is making for us tonight. Thank goodness not
making
in
the
reality.
Fluff. Yeah, so this is going to be the fluff on top. And to get this to fit the cup properly was another trick. The cup that I have here on the table is a reproduction. This is not an original 18th century Syllabub cup. So it's no problem if I have it out on the table with me here and sort of size the glass up to the cup. But to make the actual Syllabub that is in the exhibition, all I could do was take measurements off of the cup, make the Syllabub, and then hope it really fit. So the way I approach it is the same way I approach making a lid for a goblet, which I do quite a bit of. I have sort of an obsession about making lids for my goblets, so I'll show you one here once this stops moving. So I've got my water glass here that has a lid on it, and I like to get the lids so they really fit nice and snug. The way I do that is I take a caliper measurement on the top of the cup. So I've taken a measurement off the top of the cup here, and I set that measurement just a little bit short of the actual diameter of the cup. And the first move I make is to create a sphere that hits that measurement of the calipers. From there, I continue to adjust the shape of the sphere to make it a little wider. And as I continue to make it just a little bit wider, I know it's going to fit the lip of the cup. Now, for an actual lid for a goblet, I make a bit of a flange, so the flange really sits on the surface of the lip. For the Syllabub, I'm just sort of widen out the shape beyond just that sphere, and I know that shape is going to fit the cup pretty well. So I wasn't completely surprised when we finally had the opportunity to put my glass Syllabub in the actual 18th century cups. I wasn't too surprised that it fit, but it was a big relief to know that they truly fit. Once I've finished making it, there's really no adjusting the size from there, so it had to be fairly accurate. So I'm just getting the colored glass all fused in here. The Syllabub foam that I made that is in the exhibition, I used an off-white color, so it looked more like sort of a fairly simple dairy Syllabub. This yellow glass is nice and soft, so it's actually pretty friendly to use in this sort of capacity, whereas that off-white was really stiff. It takes a lot longer to work. So for demo purposes, it seemed like the yellow was a better choice, and this will be a lemon Syllabub. So just getting the colored glass all fused in. And I do need to blow in to the glass a little bit to inflate for shaping. That's why I've got this weird mask on here. It allows me to blow into the glass and still stay masked. So I'll soften this up and continue shaping away here. It's crucial that that colored glass is really fused in with the clear. When I first lay the stripes of colored glass onto the clear, they're stuck on the surface, but they're not really fused well. So we need additional heat to make that happen. So that's what we're going through here, just getting it all fused in. And now that that color's fused in pretty well, I want to start to really create the shape of the sort of fluffy foam of the Syllabub. So I'm going to carve in a couple of constrictions here. Or I guess one constriction will do the trick for this. So this constriction is going to sort of define where the bottom of that foamy form is. So just sort of carving in on the edge of this graphite marver here. Graphite's a really handy material for us glass workers. It tolerates the heat really well. And unlike most other materials, as the graphite heats up, it doesn't stick to the molten glass. Most other materials, as they heat up, they will, in fact, get stuck to molten glass. So graphite's pretty handy stuff. We use it for different work surfaces, tools, different molds. So very handy. All right, so now I've got my caliper measurements set. I've got the color all fused in here. So now I want to start to really blow this out to size. Once I've got the size set up properly, then we can add some texture to it. So there's a little extension of the hose that goes right through the mask here, so you'll have to excuse my slurring at this point. So I want to heat this all up, blow it out into a sphere. I'm really watching the glow of the glass very closely to judge temperature and viscosity. And that looks pretty good, so we're going to come out of the flame. Inflate it a bit. And since this colored glass is opaque, I have to sort of feel out how thick it is by how it moves, how much air pressure it takes to really get it to move. Transparent glass I can see right through and really see what's going on in there, but with the opaques you have to sort of feel it out. I'll check against the measurement here. It's still a little bit short. So as I'm heating the glass, I'm also bringing my hands closer together, which helps it to widen out a little bit. just a little bit shy. Get this a bit wider here. So Linnea, when are we going to make some Syllabub? I think we need to do this.
I think you're on your own, Eric.
Fair enough.
There was even a recipe that I read for making Syllabub that included the really fun step of milking the cow directly into your alcohol of choice, I guess, to like disturb it, mix it up. I don't know. I was not into that. It sounded pretty gross.
We've got a lot of dairy farms around here. We might be able to do that.
We probably could swing it.
All right. So I just hit the caliper measurement. I'm going to squeeze this just a little bit further, widen it out just a hair more.
I have a theoretical question for you, Eric. What would be like the hardest dessert to make out of glass?
A theoretical question of what would be the hardest dessert to make out of glass. I have no idea. I don't know that I know my desserts well enough. Just the hardest things to create are details. So very specific, fine details are pretty tricky. So I would imagine there are some very detailed desserts that would be pretty complex to make.
I think I know one, maybe. So one fruit that our curator didn't ask you to make that we could have made that would have been period accurate for the dessert table is a pineapple.
Ooh.
That has a lot of different textures. I'm just imagining all the little points and things on the body of the pineapple that maybe would be pretty challenging.
That could be a pretty complex one for sure.
Yeah, because they grew pineapples very similarly to the way that I talked about oranges. In England, they were probably the most prized fruit, actually, at the time. There's even an orangery that's it's in Scotland. It's probably not called an orangery because it was made for pineapples. That actually has a giant pineapple on top of it. Pretty literal.
All right. So I've got this blown out pretty well. It's going to hit the size properly. And now to continue to add some different textures to this to make it look a bit more like a real sort of foam. There's a couple different ways I can manipulate the glass to make it look foamier and add more texture. One way is by adding more bits of material here. So I'm going to add some little clumps of the colored glass, get that really fused in. That's going to give me some texture. And then I can manipulate the surface of the glass a little bit with my tweezers and sort of twist things around and dig into it a little bit. So I'm going to start by just adding some little dollops of colored glass on here. Now, one thing I have to watch out for with this glass, I don't want to leave any really sharp, acute angles where the different parts come together. If I do, they're very likely to crack. As glass is heated, it swells or expands a little bit. As it cools, it'll contract again. So if I leave really sharp, acute angles, as the glass cools and contracts, it's going to pull apart those angles and crack. So that is a concern. I've got to make sure I'm working out any of those odd angles as I go along. And I can get those angles out of there just by continuing to melt the glass, just to add a little heat. Everything sort of smooths in. So I'm going to add some more dollops of this. And as I'm adding them, I'm trying to get the surface of the bubble the right temperature and get the rod the right temperature so they really flow together as they make contact. They really fuse as I lay them on there as best possible. Yeah, so this whole project was a great experiment for me to learn how to create some different textures and really sort of explore surface more than I really had in most of the rest of my career. I've been working glass for over 25 years now, and this was really the biggest challenge I've ever had to develop textures and really explore the surface of the material. And as I mentioned earlier, the colored glass got us some of the results we needed, but where we couldn't get the right results from colored glass, we went with painting. And painting was certainly a pretty good option. And so for the different fresh fruits that I made, those, the apples and pears, like what I've got next to me here, those are all painted. Grapes, we found good colored glasses to emulate grapes, so we just used colored glass for those. The orange, as you can see, the colored glass does just fine for that as well. All right, so we'll add a few more dollops of this yellow colored glass. And for those flame workers who are watching online, this is Paramore Gold colored glass that I'm using here. Works really buttery. It's nice and smooth, easy to work with. For those of you who are not glass workers, different colored glasses work differently. They have different viscosities. Some are really soft, others at the same temperature might tend to be really stiff. Some colored glasses, if you don't have the flame set just right and you don't work the glass in the right part of the flame, they may tend to boil and bubble. So there's a lot to get used to with different colored glasses. So this stuff is pretty ideal for this sort of a purpose. It's nice and creamy and buttery, not very stiff. And you can see just adding material is adding quite a bit of texture to everything, and then I'll just add a couple more dollops of this stuff, and then I'll start to manipulate it with my tweezers a little bit more. And another effect that I can create from this colored glass, which is not necessarily the prettiest thing, but it's effective for this sort of visual texture that we want of the foamy cream. If I really focus the flame on just one spot for long enough, the glass will start to boil and bubble, and we get this actual foamy glass. So a lot of benefits to using glass for this sort of purpose. It really can emulate the foods that we're after quite well. All right. So one other thing we should point out, I'll make sure I don't forget this, our YouTube channel. This video is going to get posted to our YouTube channel and live there in perpetuity, probably in a few days after we finish this demo. And if you go to our YouTube channel, subscribe, and then comment on the video, you're going to be entered into a drawing to potentially win one of these glass food items that I've made. And I think what we'll probably do as a giveaway is one of the apples or pears that we make into ornaments. Now, we liked the look of some of the fruits so much that we turned them into ornaments that can be hung on a tree or used as a sun catcher in a window, whatever you might be into. So we added loops onto them, and we're actually selling them in our retail shop right now, which is a very new sort of venture for us to actually sell things that we demonstrate and that we make here at the museum. So go subscribe to our YouTube channel in a few days when this video goes up, and comment on the video, and you'll be entered into that drawing. And one additional thing that I really love about using the apples and the pears, and we're also doing some grape clusters for these ornaments, is it harkens back to the origins of glass Christmas ornaments. And the glass Christmas ornament was first invented in a little town in eastern Germany called Lauscha. It's in the Thuringian region, which is very mountainous, and the town was actually settled by a couple families of glassmakers back in 1597. And so there's been glassmaking there all along. And people used to decorate their Christmas trees with fruits and nuts and berries. And as the story goes, there was a point in the mid-1800s where there was a particular glass blower who couldn't afford to spare the foods to decorate the tree, but he had plenty of glass around, so he made some glass versions of those foods into decorations for his tree that year. So it seems wholly appropriate to be making these sort of apples and pears and grapes into ornaments. So just trying to add some more sort of surface texture here, pushing the glass around, sort of scooping into the surface, which is sort of counter to most of what I tend to do with my glasswork. I make a lot of very precise vessels and tend to keep things very smooth and sort of technically precise. So making this stuff got me out of my comfort zone a little bit. Got me making some things that I wouldn't otherwise venture into, which is one of the great things about working here at the Corning Museum of Glass. I mentioned at the beginning of this that we get a lot of challenges for what we make. We work with different guest artists who may or may not have experience working in glass, and we help them to realize some of their designs in glass, or sometimes we might get a request from a curator like we did for this particular exhibition, and it makes for some great challenges. And that's how you really can grow as an artist, is get out of your comfort zone and really learn to make some different objects that may not be what just easily comes to mind. And one of my favorite things about working with glass is the problem solving. So this sort of fits right into my wheelhouse, the sort of challenge that I really love. All right, I've got a fair bit of texture on this thing. And the next step is really just to get it to fit the cup. So I need to get it off of this other tube here. So I think we're pretty well textured there. All right, so to get it off of the tube, I'm just going to use this rod as just a temporary handle. I'll attach it towards the center of the form here. And then I need to remove this sculpted element from the rest of the tube. I want to maintain some of where it sort of tapers down in this area here. So to cut this apart, I'm going to do what's known as a flame cut. So I could cut a fish on the blowhose here with my calipers. There we go. All right, so to cut this open, first I want to thin it out a bit. So I'm going to heat just one narrow band of material here. And it's really thick between the color, and I started with a very thick, clear tube. So I want to thin this out a bit. So I'm sort of feeling out the thickness with my breath, judging how hard I need to blow just to get it to move a little bit here. All right. Blow it a little bit thinner. And now I'll pop a hole in here by heating just one spot and blowing. And we'll blow the glass open. This will answer one of the more common questions we get around here. If you blow too hard, can the glass pop? If it's hot enough and you blow hard enough, yes, it can pop. So now there's a hole. I just point the flame into the hole and use the flame to cut the glass apart. There we go. Don't need the hose anymore. So I just want to neaten this up a little bit. Now the Syllabub that's in the exhibition, the top is just like this, but we needed to fill in the rest of the liquid at the bottom of the cup. And we achieved that in a pretty creative way. We used a couple different materials, sort of a yellowish amber colored lighting gel, the colored gels that you would cover a light with that you're using to maybe light a concert or theater. And we added a piece of tissue paper over that gel, so we got the sort of visual color and the visual texture that we needed to really represent the Syllabub properly.
Eric, do you want to bring the picture up of it?
Yeah.
Yeah, Brad, you bring
we
the
do have
slides up.
an image there, Brad.
Yeah, so let me skip forward through a lot of things. So here's some
There
other
we go.
Syllabub cups, but yeah, but here it is. So here's the piece that is in the exhibition. The Syllabub cup with the Syllabub foam on top.
And it was a big team effort to get all these desserts looking proper and then getting them installed into the objects there. We have a wonderful team of folks here at the museum. And I did a lot of the making of the desserts. My colleague Caitlin Hyde was huge in the painting of everything that needed to be painted. She also did a wonderful job creating a lot of the grapes that we used for the grape clusters. And Linnea and Kit Maxwell, our lead curators for the show, wonderful advice and helping us to get everything set out. Our conservation team were crucial in really helping us put the glass elements into the 18th century objects without damaging anything. So it was a huge team effort. And it's always nice when the team comes together the way our teams often do here at the museum. All right, so melt this apart. So for those of you out in internet land, in Sparkling Company, the exhibition is going to be up through the end of the year. So it's time to start making some plans to get here to Corning to see the exhibition. And for those of you sitting in front of us here, hopefully you've already seen it today. If you haven't, it is at 6A on your maps. So hopefully you've been inspired to go check out the exhibition. Now I'm going to set this into my annealing oven. I'll give you just one last quick look at how this looks in the vessel here. But then I want to make sure it cools slowly and evenly. If I just leave this in the cup, it's very likely to crack it. But you get a good idea as to how those textures are created. And we'll pop this in the oven, let it cool slowly and evenly. And maybe we'll use this Syllabub cup as a separate decorative element around here. So I'll save this bit of Syllabub. All right. And that is going to bring us just about to the end of the program here. So I want to thank you guys all for hanging out and joining us for this demonstration here in-house. And thank you everybody online for joining us. Thank you so much, Linnea, for adding your wonderful perspective to things here.
Thanks, Eric. It was great to watch you work.
Excellent. Thank you. And if you all here in the audience, if you have any questions for us, why don't you come on up to the glass here. We'll answer whatever questions you may have. And again, for everybody This video is going to be posted to our YouTube channel within the next week. So if you go to our YouTube channel, you'll find this video. If you subscribe to our channel and then leave a comment under the video, we'll enter you into the drawing to then potentially win one of the glass fruit ornaments. So hopefully you'll all sign up and comment and check things out. So we're going to sign off for now. We appreciate you all joining us. Thank you very much.